Okay, so we're going to start our afternoon sessions with my colleague, Professor Chris Malinowski. He's the chair of the Computer Science and Management Engineering Department here at LIU Post. He's actually been with LIU since 2000, but prior to that, he actually has worked with the New York City Police Department in their MIS division and for production support and systems programming, and ended actually in their computer investigations and technology unit. He's spoken all over the place when it comes to cybersecurity, so I thought it would be a really good idea to allow or ask him to speak here today. So,
Thank you.
take it off, Chris.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the great introduction there and for your welcome. As Brian said, I used to be, in a prior existence, and hopefully you can all hear me, in my prior lifetime I used to be with the NYPD. And I actually retired out of there as a lieutenant in command of their computer crimes division, or the unit out of there. I was fortunate in the sense that it afforded me a lot of travel opportunities to meet with a lot of different people, and some of them worked for the federal agencies, and we got to exchange a lot of ideas. And we got a little bit more an exposure because basically our agency, the NYPD, was a 40,000 person strong army at that point, larger than a lot of state agencies. So they, even though it was a federally funded and operated initiative, they allowed us to sit in due to our size and also to where we were located, right in New York City. That was, and I retired prior to 9/11, so thankfully. But let's go and see what I have over here. I don't have too many oohs and ahs on the transitions. If I had more time, I would have had that. So generally what I like to do is I incorporate some elements of what I refer to as the Chicken Little speech, which is scare the hell out of everybody. And I do that to dramatize and sensationalize some of the elements. A lot of people feel very comfortable with the technology, and that is problematic. How many of you have an Alexa or Siri or something like that? There you go. So I don't know if you heard yesterday, I have it on one of the slides, they admitted that they have thousands of people that listen to what goes on with Alexa. So if you can imagine, if you have an Alexa in your kitchen, it could be as innocent as overhearing you talk about your recipe. If you have one in the bedroom, well, let's not go there, okay? What I object to is not so much recording that, but recording the criticisms I might get afterwards. And let's not go there either. All right. So in any case, what we have going on here is, I like to start off with the idea that security is a definition. And that's kind of problematic, and on the other hand, it's a reality. Security varies from corporation to corporation to corporation, or enterprise and individuals even, because what constitutes secure is merely a definition. So it's a set of parameters that we establish up front, and we say if we exist within this state, we're secure. All right, so what if you had a breach? Well, in theory, quote unquote, if you're within those parameters, you're secure. You've just had a breach. That's kind of a bad definition. On the other hand, if you haven't had a breach, but your parameters are slipshod and they're full of holes as a chain link fence, you're quote unquote secure. So this I find a bit problematic. Hopefully most people find that they have a good or decent set of parameters. And I'm going to circle back to that idea of what are your parameters. So when we think about it, what are we trying to protect? Obviously, assets. And our assets range anywhere from our human capital right down to the data. And I know that data is a big, big, big issue today. Privacy, confidentiality, and all of that. So the assets we're trying to protect are up there. We're also trying to protect our hardware. When you think about it, we're all focused on, I shouldn't say all, it's a generalization. However, a lot of the focus is on putting into place mechanisms and controls that deal with the electronic side of technology-based systems. And then we tend to overlook or gloss over anything that's physical, anything that deals with people with whom we interact, or that interact with the systems. Any of those controls and features. We don't worry about who we hire necessarily, or we allow people to use mechanisms and controls that are electronic in nature that can be easily falsified. Years ago, I remember walking through the headquarters gate, and there was actually a cop there, and two girls walked through. The ID card at the time was a laminated card. The upper half was the photo, lower half was white print, and this person flashed a card, walked through, and I overheard the person saying, "You see, I told you if I showed my college ID, I could get through." As simple as that. Why does that matter? Because somebody could walk in and perform some sort of grudge act or worse, terrorist act, and physically ruin the infrastructure. And there goes your data. There goes maybe lives. So yeah, this is the Chicken Little part of it. But I'm stating this to underscore, let's not forget about the basics of any security system. It all starts with physical security. What is a security incident? Once you're in an insecure state. That's basically it. That's kind of what I was saying. So how do we deal with this? We have three basic services, security services, and they're easy enough to remember. The infamous CIA acronym, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So if we consider these, we also have to worry about other components of our system. The hardware, the software, and the wetware. Wetware being us, people, all right, basically. So these are all the assets. Let's run through some of the things that could happen. Now, just last night I was giving a class, and the lecture was talking about these, what it's called chained exploits. It's not a single thing that undermines the security of a system, but it's a series of things. They could be related, they may not be, but they're constructed so as to go, if you remember what a geometric proof was back in the day. You didn't go directly from, yeah, these are congruent angles because of whatever. You had to go through the gory details of saying, hey, I got from here to the next step. And once I have that, I can get here. And then from there, I can go here, and so on. Kind of like this, chained exploits. So let me give you an idea. These are artificially constructed. May not happen in real life, but it possibly could. And once again, it's to underscore the nature of what's going on. So the credit card information, somebody had credit card information on their system. Lots of people do. So one fellow owed money, so he decided that he was going to his credit card company, he was going to get his money, steal credit card information, and then sell it on the black market, on the dark web, whatever you'd like to call it. So in doing so, what he wound up doing is, in essence, he used the web portal to get to the database behind the web server. Now, ideally, you never, ever, ever keep your database server on the same physical host device as your web server. And you're about to see why. The other thing ideally you don't do is you don't forget to put in a non-default password for the system administrator. Okay, does this happen? Yeah, you'd say not, right? I'll tell you this, when I was working for the MIS division, there were development apps that we were working. How many of you work in IS or IT, just as a show? All right, I'm just looking, because if I throw out verbiage and vocabulary, I want to know how deeply I have to explain. So there were development applications that were being done, and it was on an IBM mainframe using something called CICS, basically transaction-based systems. All right? So what would happen is that they'd go from development to the process of putting it into production, a live system, and yeah, our customers, quote unquote, were all internal. All right? However, for the developers, to work with these applications, you have the typical user ID password challenge. Anybody want to take a random guess at what the password was?
1, 2, 3, 4.
No,
Password.
NYPD.
Uh-oh.
Okay? And these were privileged users. When they moved the application over to production, guess what the password was for the privileged user?
NYPD.
You got it, okay? So that's what was going on. So when I say it's artificial, it's also likely in some cases because people have this mentality. I don't need it done right, I just need it done right away. It doesn't have to work right as long as it looks right. I'm working on a third one, so if somebody comes up with one of those, I'll have that on the web sometime. So in any case, this fella decided to go in, he sees that there's a database. Another thing that should never be done is that a user sitting at a screen should not be able to use that web browser or some other program to talk directly to the database server on the back end and issue it a database command directly. So basically what happens is you have a web browser, you have a web server. This guy talks to the server, says, this is what I want. The web server then formulates the command, builds the command. You don't pass it right through. That's weakness number 2. So what happened was he managed to get into the database using a default password, downloaded something onto the server. Because it's a web server and you have to get into it from the outside world, that's its purpose. Weakness number 3 was somebody allowed files to be placed in a specific folder or directory. So what he did is he dumped all the credit card information into the folder where he could get it back over the internet, then sold the credit card information. So that's what I mean by chained exploits. All right, everybody's comfortable with that notion? I guess, all right, without going into too much detail. There was another one. This one's a little more insidious, a little more damaging, a lot more sensational, as a matter of fact, where somebody was paid to deliberately to steal R&D information from a corporation and then to tank its stock value. So he did this by social engineering, and if you folks are all okay with that term, all right, so it's what teenagers do to us as parents, social engineering, okay? Or it's what our government does to all of us. So in any case, he social engineered his way in to see the chief financial officer on the pretense of looking for a job, seeking employment, who takes him around. He gets the badge for the RFID entry card and clones it because he takes in a card reader and clones it. He then clones the janitor's card. Now he can get in anywhere. He gets in, he goes into the what they call the knock center and the wire closet. He secretes a laptop that he can connect to over the internet, takes a wireless access point that he can get to that has their logo and serial number on it. And bottom line is he winds up communicating with his secreted laptop and wirelessly over that network getting into the R&D server. He plants the other thing, the wireless access point, into a hospital across the street, uses some network-based tools that you don't have to be a sophisticate. I can even use them, the point-and-click stuff that run on Linux, all open source, and he winds up finding out in a hospital, which machines he can access through his stolen and placed access point. And it turns out he causes them to have a denial of service attack. It turns out they were machines that were being monitored. They failed to deliver meds or inappropriately monitor patients. People die. Yeah, it's an extreme case. The reason I present this is because it shows that it's not one little thing that can happen in order for something to fail. And when you have to consider protecting assets, it's not just one little thing. So you have to be paranoid because sometimes, in fact, they are out to get you. All right. I thought that would be a calming influence, so I put that up. Nice tropical marine fish. And the reason I put this up, and this actually happened, okay? There's an unnamed casino that had a fish tank in the lobby. And with this lovely world of technology, they wanted to be able to make sure that the fish didn't get too hot, too cold. So they monitored the thermostat, which was connected to the network. Electronically, they monitored wirelessly. But it also happened to be connected to the casino's network. Okay? So it's appropriate that these are fish because they broke in to the database and retrieved the information of all the whales to the casino. Well, the whales aren't fish, but you get the idea, right? So this underscores my concept, my assertion that we are much too comfortable with the technology, much too complacent. How many of you, when you go to an airport or a Starbucks, check your email? Yeah, don't lie, all right? How many of you that don't check email use Facebook? There you go. You may stop doing this after what I tell you, and we're all aware of this. Somebody can go into a Starbucks or the airport or whatever on an open Wi-Fi network and basically get into the router that is giving out all of the internet addresses to all of us. It can also, when an attempt is made to connect from you and I, to connect to the outside world, it can also perhaps direct that request to somebody sitting there lurking in the corner, the bad guy, who intercepts it, who has set up a tool, once again, that you just press and click, and it constructs a series of attacks against your system and all the possible browsers and systems that you could be running, finds the one in fact you are running, hits an exploit, executes it on your system, and now owns your machine. Installs a keylogger to take all your keystrokes, so it doesn't matter if you have VPN, virtual private network, and you think that everything's encrypted because your keystrokes aren't encrypted. You follow? Why is this important? Because these people work for our enterprises. These people walk back with these devices to our enterprises. So, here is the moral of the story. The very last thing. Have the enterprise of it. It's that important that you communicate back to work. Have the enterprise pay for some sort of connectivity, like an AT&T or Verizon account or whatever it is, and then you can safely go on to VPN via that. It's encrypted before you even get to it, if you follow where that's going. So just make sure that you're aware of that. Already talked about our friend Alexa. And while you think that there are thousands of people apparently being paid, I think I have the bullet points up here. This is just the technology over here. The next slide will have the verbiage. So we have a lot of these IP phones on our desktops. It's an open mic potentially. Even back in rotary phone days, rotary dial days. And that's something you can ask your kids. You know what a rotary dial is? You know what a floppy disk is? Kids that are starting college today have never really used CDs, so to speak. So I like that list. People that start college this year have never encountered and it's always amazing, right? I remember punch cards, right? So in any case, doorbell ringers even have cameras in them now. Forget about what other technology is there. The point is, we are putting in our own surveillance devices that can be leveraged against us and have been leveraged against us. There was an incident, and you may have heard about it, probably about 3 or 4 months ago. It's on the news that somebody wound up having a message routed from an Alexa speaker in their home to somebody in Seattle, Washington. And it turned out it wasn't done intentionally, it was accidental. Alexa heard something that sounded like the catchphrase, Alexa, whatever. And it just took off from there. Scary, right? All right. This was in CNN Business yesterday, so I'm not making it up. When you don't see slides, I'm making it up. This one I'm not making up. So in any case, your information, your recipe, is being overheard potentially in Costa Rica and Romania. Where else? I don't know. People can opt out of Amazon using whatever. Yeah, you can opt out. I think part of the big problem is, under this guise of constraint of free trade, we have to opt out rather than opt in. But that's a personal opinion. Okay, I don't think it's so personal. I think I share that pretty much with everybody. All right. So here's the other thing. Auditors don't have access to customers' full name or addresses, but they do have the serial number and the account number of the Amazon, on the Amazon end. Yeah, okay. This is what goes on. It gets even better. I have another slide up that talks about identity, PII. So it would have been nice, I'm trying to keep the time down. The video was pretty cool. You may or may not have heard about it. A couple of years ago, somebody actually hacked a Jeep using the internet. They got into the entertainment system of the car wirelessly, took over steering, braking, air conditioning, turned the motor off, all of that. These are devices that we rely on. Tesla, yeah, okay. It gets worse and worse. Tesla over here, great car and everything, I'm sure, and it's not just Tesla, it's other vehicles like that. It was fooled apparently recently in going out of the lane because somebody placed down on the pavement different markers and it faked out the car. We heard about the one where somebody was killed because he wound up in the Tesla, he wound up plowing into a truck that made a turn in front of him, and the car's computer vision system didn't really distinguish that it was a truck from the sky apparently. So the bottom line here is I'm not trying to bash cars, I'm not trying to bash particular vendors or manufacturers. What I'm trying to do is simply state our reliance on technology has brought us to this point. I'm going to bring it back to where it needs to be. So that's part of all the scare tactics. There are acts out there that talk about personal information. Certainly there's HIPAA, there's the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, or GLBA. In a 2000 study, now this goes back to, they don't have your name, they just have your account number and serial number. In a 2000 study, somebody made a claim that they were able to take a group of people, and even though they weren't identified specifically, they could identify 87% of them because of their gender, their date of birth, and their zip code. Right. Now we're back into the information arena, which is where I'd like us to be. State laws banned data mining of medical records, but First Amendment overturned it in Fed court. So what we're dealing with is not just our own capacity to deal with the infrastructure we have to manipulate data, to store data, to disseminate it, but the constraints imposed on us by agencies, federal, state, regulatory agencies. MIT in 2015 found that they could, they did this in a European country, but the base was 1.5 million customers using cell phones. They identified correctly 95% of the users, just by location using cell phone information. So, where does that leave us? That leaves us, I'm going to fly through these because I don't wish to really focus on this. I had started a slightly different presentation and then steered it into this. What we're talking about here is our data assurance, and somebody I understand already spoke somewhat about data integrity, so I'll try and gloss over this. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have accurate and consistent data over its entire life cycle, which means that's the asset we're trying to protect. Let's identify the different stages in that life cycle. They're all listed there. Bottom line is, how do we do this? We impose control mechanisms, and that's where we get into what we can manage, what we can control, what we do have power over in our own domain. Control mechanisms now talk about the quality. There are a couple of very, very, very minor questions I have. One of the things about integrity is, and I'm not going to stay on this long, I just wanted to highlight that you're making sure that the data is recorded as intended and it is presented as it was recorded later on. So integrity is not the same as security in here. Integrity is concerned also with unintentional changes. This is controllable to a large degree if you have enough procedures in place. These are basically IT controls that you can set into place. So there's a whole listing of things that could be unintentional. Does it matter to you? And it may or may not. I'm just posing the question, because this technically is not the same data as it was recorded. If you have a picture, and a single picture in a 50 megabyte image changes, but you know what the image is, and except for that single pixel, does that matter to you? Don't know. Depends, I guess, on your business. Right? If you lose the entire image, obviously that matters. If you have an Amazon order, and you have in there, order me 10 copies of a book, and somebody changes it to 10 million, I'd say that's a problem, okay? You get the idea. I'll go, the physical integrity also goes to the physical security aspects over there. There's a whole realm of things that could happen. Who would have ever thought, for example, that somebody would take, New York State, by the way, their State Attorney General's office had an office in the World Trade Center. From a business perspective, I realized the life loss was catastrophic. When you look at it on the next day, you have to resume operations. The AG's office lost about 30,000 cases that had been stored there. Okay, now we're talking information again. Right? Who would have ever thought? You would think fire, you might think earthquake. If you're 30 floors up, you don't think flood. Okay? Who would have ever thought a plane would plow into those buildings? And sadly, I think you can see I'm cynical. Most of you refuse to cynic to my level. One time I was flying in on daylight, and I passed over the harbor, and I said, wouldn't take but 30 seconds to deviate off course and slam into the building. Sadly, But this is the mindset maybe some people have to adopt, to foresee all the bad things. You can't prevent a natural disaster. But now we have to consider things like terrorist acts and other actors such as that. I'm not going to go into this. This is for your IT people. I started going into that. So mechanisms. If you have a system, an information system, design security in from the onset. Plan it, design it, build it in. Right. Probably one of the biggest things that we do is we are more in a rush to beat out competitors so that we forego some of the stuff that should go into a system. Or it would take too long, or it would cost too much. We're focused on getting certain features out rather than making sure that they're secure. Okay. One of the things that we can do is physical security there. I highlighted highlighted in there, put in least access that somebody requires as your model. If somebody doesn't need to see something, why should they? Correct? Everybody agrees with that, right? Okay. So how many people then, if you agree with that, and this is a culture thing, how many people then would turn around and say, why does the receptionist have to have an internet connection on the desktop computer? What is that person doing on your network connected to the outside world? There's no need for that. So we violate this on a daily basis. So it depends how serious we want to be and how paranoid we wish to be. I told you, it's the Chicken Little presentation, okay? Layered security, if you have one hurdle to get over, it's one thing. If you have 20 hurdles to get over to get to your goal, that's another thing, especially if they're different types of hurdles. Physical security, electronic security, all of that good stuff. So security can be an authentication challenge. Something that you know, your password, something that you have, that RFID card, for example, or just you, biometrics. They all have problems with them, but they can be employed. You can restrict access according to time or location, and then what you can do is when people go on vacation, pull them out of the system. If they are asked to leave or leave voluntarily and they're no longer with the organization, they should not be in the security tables. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that. It's unbelievable. Management technique. Let's transfer risk. Did we really? Not so sure, because your enterprise is still going to be impacted. So what do? We transfer the cost. Certainly, we reduce the expenditures and the revenue might increase, and we move it to offsite or the infamous cloud. Who has access to that cloud? Have you vetted them? Do you know what their procedures are? You kind of get the idea, right? So what have we done? We've offloaded, on the face of it, our responsibility, but not really. Not really, and I'll indicate why. The other thing that you want to do is reduce the attack surface. Don't offer so many visible or electronically visible or physically visible means of entry into a system. That's what we need to try and do. Here's the other thing. Policies and procedures. You need to have policies, you need to have procedures. As part of doing a review, you need to examine everything in your system. What they don't say necessarily is you need to examine things that your system is connected to. And by system, I mean all elements. The hardware, the software, and the wetware. You need to examine the environment. What else is in your environment that interacts with that system? Can you come up with and I'm talking about real set of parameters that makes you secure, not just a pro forma. Can you come up with, let's assume we can. We come up with a set of parameters and we are designated as being within those parameters, we are secure. Right? The problem is, are we really? If I change something within my information system infrastructure, anything, I turn around and I say, you know what? Let me review my policies and procedures and make sure that I'm still within. I don't need to change any of the parameters. I'm still secure. The problem is something outside, external to you and your controls, has changed. You may never know it, and that throws you unknowingly into an insecure state. So, is it of concern? Yeah. As I said, I'm dramatizing stuff, but not really. It's things people should be aware of. Shouldn't lose sleep over it, unless you're the IT guy. All right. So now we get to the other thing. You've had an incident. What do you do? Who do you notify? What do you do? And it all depends on what has happened, when it happened, and all of that. There are issues of law enforcement being involved. There are issues of handling things internally and then either getting law enforcement involved or not. There's regulatory compliance, and you have to notify people that have been affected. So we talk about things like SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley. You have to notify anybody impacted. If people have had their credit card information taken, your business has to notify them. And not just that, if you do business in a different state. For example, California comes out with a regulation that says, if this has happened to your corporation, you must do this, and you're California-based. You say, I'm safe. But then they say, or if you do business within California. And of course, how do you have an electronic presence and not do business? So things that you might not think affect you that are happening a country away, on the other side of the globe, are going to affect you. Take GDPR, for example. That's a big thing right there. So my suggestion is to treat everything, I'll try and wrap it up very quickly, to treat everything forensically. That means prepare and gather information, prepare it as if it were going to be presented in court as evidence. Document everything very carefully. And then, does it stand up to the way that you gathered it, documented it according to professional scrutiny? It may not ever go to court, but if somebody says, let's go to court, you now have an issue. Laws, I'll just flash up here. ECPA goes back to '86. What do we care? Why do we care about that? Because it has to do with the ability to gather certain records, emails specifically. So it's done by subpoena, but then there are criteria in there that say you need a warrant. So the whole point here is these are all business records. If you decide to get rid of your business records, that may be a crime to somebody as well, right? Unless apparently you're running for president. I don't know. I'm just annoyed that anybody can do that. So let me wipe this machine. Okay, you get the idea. So we have this over here as well. You can see that, and here's another thing. This was talking about sharing information with the government on potential cyber threats. It was passed in the House, hadn't passed in the Senate yet. They can't get their act together. The problem with this is you have organizations that decide that it is too free. New York State, to give you an idea, unauthorized use of a computer trespass, depending on what you do, can be a felony, which means punishable by more than a year in jail. Computer tampering, duplication, possession of computer-related materials, and then aggravated harassment. So that relationship that people have going on at work could be construed as aggravated harassment. If it goes awry, cyberbullying could be as well. This one I put up because this is probably where you're going to wind up going to in reality, if anything, and that's going to be the feds. So a lot of the stuff for the feds is under U.S. Title 18, and I highlighted stuff in yellow there because I thought it's great. First of all, number one, it's confusing. Secondly, anytime I see anything in legislation that cites the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, I have to wonder, okay? But it talks about laws that deal with injury to the United States or the advantage of a foreign nation and willfully communicates, delivers, or transmits. Maybe we'll hear about this with the release of the Mueller report. I don't know. But as far as you people are concerned, intentionally accesses a computer without authorization, information contained in a financial record of a financial institution, blah, 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 or information from any protected computer. So protected computer is federal agency, obvious, right? Here's what's not so obvious. I got on my PC and I conducted a transfer in my accounts. That might qualify. My point being that you go to the feds because, as we know this, you can take anything and make anything of it. And I don't mean this as a knock. I don't. I'm just saying that it can happen. Banking records, any sort of records, this whole thing that we've seen with this college admissions stuff, what'd they get them on? Bribery? No. Wire fraud? All of that good stuff. So they take something in one law and apply it to construe against how they want to get it applied to some other situation. That's what we're talking about over here. You're probably going to go with the feds. So here's the other thing that you can do, because I'm over on time. SOX compliance is very important as well. We're running a business. It's meant for financial records. Here's where it comes into the controls thing. Once again, we're talking about compliance and quality controls. In 450 executives 4 years ago stated that about 75%, three-quarters, used compliance for SOX to drive continuous improvement. That should perk up Brian's ears. And it did, okay, of the process for financial reporting. And then half of them roughly reported moderate to significant gains in internal controls. So they're working through, and they're using this compliance either of necessity or if they want to help them drive quality. And that's one of the points. Internal controls that we're talking about with this particular act deal with accessing. Do you have the rights to get to it? Security, change management. Now we're talking about potentially for the IT folks, DevOps. We're talking about taking something out of development, putting it in production. Can you demonstrate that you have processes in place? Can you demonstrate that you followed the processes? If something's changed in your environment, can you demonstrate you adapted your processes and policies? All of that sort of thing. All right, GDPR is about Europe. Release of public-private information. So basically, it's impacting, in theory, how anybody that does business with people in the EU must operate. And I think we probably heard in the news that thing about Zuckerberg and Facebook and all of that. That's strictly privacy of information in the EU. So they're trying to levy all sorts of fines against them. All right, if you like, you can take a look at InfraGard, and that's basically an association, a partnership of industry with FBI, and they use it to disseminate information and concerns. That's a nice little thing that you can get to. You can also meet other people in local law enforcement there. They also have an Internet Crime Complaint Center that you may wish to take a look at. That's also dissemination of information, FBI and private industry. And then there is National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, also FBI. There are a lot of other things they do, but these are things basically that are available to people in academia or industry. So that's it. I thank you for your time. Sorry I went over by a bit. Hopefully you won't bash me for being too negative over here. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Any additional questions for the professor?
Yes, sir.
A couple of years ago, my wife's identity was hacked, and local law enforcement doesn't do a thing. And as a taxpayer, that's really annoying.
What happened, if I can ask?
I believe it was the Experian or one of the data breaches. Her data was taken
Yeah,
away.
okay,
There's
that-
a lot of purchases made that she didn't make.
That's one of the things. When you talk, the reason I mention the FBI is probably your go-to place for many things is because the jurisdictional issues will exceed the reach of many local law enforcement. They wind up going to the FBI, or they'll wind up going and contacting somebody in the State Department, because odds are the hack originated somewhere outside of the United
Well, we
States.
traced the address to a site in Louisiana.
Oh, did they?
No, not them. We.
You did?
Yeah.
Well,
You know, and we're paying the cops to be cops.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to be the cops.
we've dealt with that. When I was with the NYPD, what we did is when we had something local like that, we contacted the other agency and we set something up, a controlled drop, for example, when it was like that, and they pick up, and then you get them on the other end. So we've done that. You can do things like that. They're not going to, truthfully, I don't know what the state is right now of doing these types of investigations, other than
Because it's one of the most prevalent crimes around.
It is.
And local law enforcement doesn't do anything.
It is.
It's a little.
And I think what happens is that the mechanisms that are employed by business folks are such that they lend themselves to abuses like this. And I think that they should impose greater controls because, remember that, how do you do this? Something you have, something you know, or you. A PIN number is something that you know. A card is something that you have. You know. Not very conducive to security. And the cost is borne. What happens a lot of times is that the cost, and here's the part of the real answer. You come to me as a complainant, you go down as the complainant. It gets transferred to your institution that reimburses you. They're now the complainant of record. They're the ones that are bearing the loss. And that's possibly part of the answer, possibly. I'm not saying it is. It sucks all the way around. And when it, like a vacuum cleaner, when it doesn't suck, it blows. Yes, sir.
Professor, you mentioned about personal data information.
Yes.
So when I Google my name, all my personal information comes in.
Yes.
Even my age, my address, my phone number, everything. So
What can you do about
what
it?
can I do about it?
All right, I don't know if you heard, the man says that when he Googled himself, he goes and sees personal information, name, address, date of birth, everything like that. Some of the information we give away ourselves. Some of it's available from public records. Some people will actually then gather it all together. You got the idea. And I found myself on there again. So what I did is dumb as it sounds, I got onto the internet and I fired Chucky Schumer an email. Okay, like that'll do good. Governor Cuomo an email. And we'll see if it goes, and Tom Swazi an email. And the bottom line is, the people that can do something about this are the ones that are sitting in Congress, whether or not, to take it off of there, if it's on the dark web, fine. How many of us go on the dark web on a daily basis? But you have to realize as well, as far as information is concerned, and now this also goes towards enterprise breaches, to gain information about people, all you have to do is connect together dots from different places, so that you have happy birthday, but no year on your Facebook page, all right? And you don't even have your birthday on there, but people are wishing you happy birthday. It doesn't take a mental genius to figure out the month and the day, and if they find out where you went to high school, they've got the year probably. So you see what I mean? And the problem now is that we're in such a state that this technology is so omnipresent and it's deemed to be so innocuous when it's really not. And the other aspect is, I think too many people, my own personal opinion only, so please don't cite me, too many people are making too much money all the way around, and then other people will cite restraint of free trade. So you can't stop me from calling 1 million people, that's restraint of my ability to trade. Really. You know? Oh, that's the other thing I didn't mention. Everybody's gotten the robocalls, right? Robocalls, rather. All right, so the robocalls probably are coming for a voice over IP telephone because you might have to put in, you can put in the source calling number, which is why, in theory, you can pick up the phone and you'll see that you are calling yourself. But typically they'll call from the area code. Well, what's to say that soon we won't have what they call deep fakes, where you'll hear somebody that sounds like the person you expect to hear on that phone number, and they'll try to social engineer you to do something. This is all the technology that's going on today, and I don't know where it will end up. I honestly don't. I'm going to be eating Jell-O in the home, for as long as I get my Jell-O. Green Jell-O. All right? So I don't know what we do about that, truthfully. I think it needs to be legislated, but even if it's legislated, I don't know how they're going to stop it. My opinion also is with emails, spam emails, with these phone calls, if they were to simply charge people that did in excess of what a reasonable threshold is deemed to be for personal usage, and they charged them, they wouldn't be doing it, as opposed to, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
All right? No, you're quite well. Hey, if I were king, but I'm not. Anybody else have anything, or, no? Once again, thanks for your time and kindness.